Someone made a decision at some point to maybe not cut a corner, but to not completely apply a security control or a best practice because it felt like it was inconvenient or there was an assumption made about the likelihood of something bad happening. Or a business person might say, we accept the risk. That accepting the risk, if you're not keeping track of that and you're making an assumption about accepting the risk, that's where organizations invariably get in trouble. You're always checking for gaps. You're always checking to see where you might have some things slipping through. So a great example might be, do you know who all the people are in your organization? Do you know if they're full-time people or contractors? Do you know all the devices that they're using? When they lose a device, or no longer use it, are you keeping track of that? It is effort that has a lasting impact on you. It strengthens you. It improves your capabilities, your critical thinking. And I think in the long run, I anticipate people who use AI or other tools to shortcut that learning process to alleviate that struggle are doing themselves a disservice in the long run.
Hi, Luke. Welcome to Be Fearless podcast. It's a pleasure to have you here.
Thank you for inviting me. I'm glad to be here.
Yeah, I just wanted to share your story with anyone who's going to listen to it right now about your story, how you came into this space. So Luke actually seen it all from early days of network administration to leading global security teams. And you describe yourself as pragmatic, risk-focused, and professionally paranoid. I'd have to know more. What do you mean by professionally paranoid? In your past life, you were Global CISO at Sequoia Capital.
That's right.
And right now you're a co-member of Latacora team, security firm that helps businesses of all sizes build information security practices. So you had such an unconventional path into cybersecurity. You studied biology and right now, and then you moved to VC. So how did this transition take place? How did you move from one to another? Tell me more.
So again, thank you for having me. I did not plan to get into IT or technology or security as a career. I kind of accidentally fell into it. I think I have some personality characteristics that work well with technology and with cybersecurity. You mentioned the professionally paranoid, which again, I am naturally a pretty skeptical person. We can maybe talk about that. But originally, I studied biology in college. And when I moved to the Bay Area after college, thought that I was going to go into education. I was planning to teach biology, actually. But unfortunately, it is not possible to pay rent in the Bay Area, even back when I moved here many years ago as a teacher. So I got a job in help desk working for a biotech.
Interesting.
And in the process of getting that job and starting to work more hands-on with technology in a business context and working with scientists, I found that having a careful, quantitative mindset, a skeptical mindset, a curious attitude about the way things work, the way things fit together, and the way things break, over time, made me successful in IT and running systems and networks, and was a set of characteristics that over time really lent itself toward cybersecurity. And so after doing some help desk and some consulting, I became an IT manager and eventually took over the IT operations and security operations of a couple of VC firms, and then moved to Sequoia Capital, where I did also a mix of IT, became the CISO, and took over the global security leadership of that organization.
How did this jump happen into venture capital? It's just, it's such a shift from biotech to VC. What do you think was the pivotal moment for you?
Yeah, for venture capital, it was a happy accident, I will say. It was definitely not planned. After working at the biotech, I started to do some consulting, and some of my consulting customers just happened to be venture capital firms.
Okay.
I was located in the peninsula of Silicon Valley, and it just so happened that small businesses that needed IT services at the time happened to be some VC firms.
Okay. Interesting.
So it was a happy coincidence that it worked out that way.
That was quite a coincidence, and very happy coincidence considering where you ended up afterwards. I'm curious, how would you describe what you did at Sequoia, and how the things you would say work differently in VC firm in cybersecurity versus any other industry?
So at Sequoia specifically, but even at the prior firms that I was working at, the roles, VC firm, if you take a step back, VC firms are fundamentally small to medium-sized businesses. They're just not that large. They, in Silicon Valley at least, may have a large brand identity, but fundamentally these are organizations comprised of small groups of investment professionals and finance folks working with founders and entrepreneurs to invest the capital from their limited partners. The thing that is unique about doing cybersecurity in a venture capital context really is that relationship of the founders and entrepreneurs to the investment professionals.
Okay.
In my experience, the most successful venture capitalists, investment professionals, are the ones who they have a broad set of skills. They're some of the smartest people you'll ever meet.
Yeah.
They have a good finance background. They're very curious people. They're innovation seekers, many times have been founders or entrepreneurs themselves, and have a very broad set of expertise that they bring to their investment activities. So it makes them very fun people to work with, great colleagues and coworkers, always something new to learn every day. The downside is they're very fast moving. They work 24/7. They are fundamentally innovation seeking people with very short attention spans. And it is very important to, in a security context, it's very important to enable that pace of business, that innovation seeking, the ability to test drive software, to be very responsive, to never slow things down as folks travel around the world, as they work 24/7 on behalf of the entrepreneurs who they support or the limited partners to whom they have a fiduciary responsibility. So it's a very demanding environment, and it makes it a pretty exciting place to do security, actually. It's very interesting. And then for fun, there's the SEC, or in the US, the SEC. There's usually a federal regulator of some sort, a financial regulator who's in the mix. In the US, it's the SEC. In Europe, China, India, there would be others.
Yeah.
But that also adds another layer to the work that you're doing.
Yeah.
Is that sort of regulatory angle as well.
Okay, that's a lot of things to cover. So were you mostly focused on helping the VC teams itself to stay secure, or was it also spreading into portfolio companies?
Every VC firm has a different approach toward the services they provide their founders. In the organizations that I was with, my role was primarily focused internally. So for the most part, I was securing our internal organization, our data of our founders and entrepreneurs, and our limited partners.
Yeah. I wonder what kind of threats you encountered throughout that journey, because I would imagine it to be so non-traditional versus, let's say, bigger organizations or other industries. Does any particular story come to mind when it comes to cyber risk within VC?
Yeah, it's a good question. In venture capital, a lot of these small to medium-sized businesses that are in the business of financial investing, a lot of their security challenges look like corporate security challenges. Okay. It looks like how to keep data safe, how to use email safely, how to use SaaS software safely. A trend that has definitely happened over the last 10 years is more and more investment firms are writing software. And certainly at the organizations that I've worked at, we've written a lot of software. And so in some ways, the most innovative venture capital firms have security challenges that look like the challenges of software startups, companies that are writing software. You have developers and data scientists, and you're using GitHub, and you're using public cloud. Yeah. So a lot of the attack surface and a lot of the risks that you have to manage more and more are looking like data security or application security challenges.
Okay.
So that's one way that I'd say the security landscape has changed a bit for venture capital over the last decade.
Okay.
Certainly in the last 5 years, for sure.
Okay.
But yes, I've definitely seen a fair amount of security incidents, not just in the VC world, but in my role at Latacora.
Yeah.
We help small businesses, a lot of times startups or companies that write software, stay secure. And we help them with various security services that we provide. So I've seen a lot of different security breaches. Some of them are as simple as an endpoint compromise, malware getting installed on an endpoint, someone's credentials getting stolen, and a third party signing in with those credentials to a service, all the way to multiple instances of mailboxes getting compromised, or even full takeover of a domain, where really you can't trust anything in the environment, even the administrative accounts that exist in that organization.
Wow.
So, yeah, I've seen a broad set of things go wrong. I'll say there's a common thread among all of those situations, which is someone made a decision at some point to maybe not cut a corner, but to not completely apply a security control or a best practice because it felt like it was inconvenient, or there was an assumption made about the likelihood of something bad happening. And so those exceptions of where you've decided to, a compliance person might say, or a business person might say, we accept the risk.
Yeah.
That accepting the risk, if you're not keeping track of that and you're making an assumption about accepting the risk, that's where organizations invariably get in trouble. That one place where MFA wasn't applied quite the way that you thought it was, or we weren't going to push the security software, that EDR software, to all of our endpoints because we didn't think that the developers really comprised that much risk inside the environment. When you're not applying your controls universally, really, when you're cutting corners, you have risk that exists in the organization, and that's one of the most common ways that I've seen breaches happen.
I can imagine being paranoid in this case must really help into, looking into all of this. And is this how you really describe being paranoid about this kind of, little cutting corners situations? Yeah,
I think about the paranoid is a funny word. It's I think it's a combination of being skeptical. It's a combination of sort of assuming that the worst thing is more likely to happen than the best thing is likely to happen. So, and for me, being paranoid is really being driven by data and not being driven by anecdote. And so I want to be skeptical when I hear a story from someone that something is much safer than it appears on the surface. I want to know why. Why is something safer than I think it should be? Yeah, if someone wants to relax a control or tell me that, actually that data really I promise the data only lives in prod and it doesn't live in a dev environment or a lower environment. I don't know. Tell me more. I want to be a little bit paranoid. Imagine something isn't exactly the way it's been narrated to me. Let's collect a little bit more information and learn more about that. I think being data-driven and trying to collect more information that way serves security leaders well when you can be skeptical.
Definitely. And if we even think about the traits, I just find it so, in a way, funny because, as you said, looking for the worst scenarios and being data-driven rather than story-driven is almost the opposite of VC world itself, because VC world loves stories and VC world has to expect the best, right? So from the cultural perspective, did you face any, obstacles when it comes to communicating that culture of cybersecurity that is practically complete opposite of the VC culture itself?
That is a great question. And I think you're totally right. I think Silicon Valley would grind to a halt if people walked around just saying the worst thing that would happen, right? That's not the way entrepreneurship works. It's not the way people think about innovation. You want to be able to tell good stories and optimistic stories. But I think that as if you think about one of the roles of a venture capitalist or a VC firm is to be a fiduciary for your limited partners. A lot of the attention is paid on VCs between that relationship between VCs and the founders.
Yeah.
But ultimately, VCs are also accountable to the limited partners who provide the vast majority of the funds that go into funding a startup. And so in the organizations I've worked, I've been very lucky to work in places where there was a deep commitment to doing right by the LP and upholding the standards, the controls, the practices that allow investments to be successful. So you are right that a security person who is too doom and gloom and too pessimistic doesn't fit really well in a venture capital culture that is more naturally optimistic.
Yeah.
But if you talk to a limited partner, they will be very happy to know that there are very skeptical security people and risk people and compliance people inside those organizations, making sure that their funds are being accounted for carefully and cautiously. But you're right. When you are, like, definitely to go back to the question, when communicating with the business, when communicating with the partners in a VC firm, it is important to have those communications happen in a business context that is aware of and acknowledges their need to justifiably, like, move quickly, try new things, be innovative. A security culture that is a culture of no, or, oh, that seems risky, we shouldn't do that, is a security leader will not be successful in that environment. It's just really antithetical to the business.
Yeah. Like, I guess it takes all kinds of people to make it a successful company, right? If you were always bullish, then, there are risks associated with it. So it's all about the balance. So how did you come to Latacora? How did you join the company, and how this transition happened?
Yeah. So I had been, at the time that I mentioned that I came to Silicon Valley right after college and spent over 20 years in venture capital doing IT and cybersecurity for those organizations. It was a long time. Yeah. And eventually I got to a place where I wanted to learn something new and I wanted to try something a little bit different. I'd gotten really deep domain expertise in cybersecurity and in IT operations within the context of venture capital. But as I mentioned before, that was mostly internally facing. Yeah. And I had great luck and fortune to be able to meet a lot of really interesting entrepreneurs doing really cool things with technology, but and ultimately thought that it would be very rewarding as the next phase of my career to work more directly with them. I had known about Latacora for quite some time, and when I was looking for my next role and the thing that I wanted to move to next in my career, the next way I wanted to mature in my career, went to Latacora and the partners there to ask for their advice and to see what they thought, and realized that I had a unique opportunity to join them and work with some founders more directly in a much more hands-on role. And so I thought that was really exciting, and I decided to make that jump about a year ago.
Yeah, that is exciting. And I think one of the trends I noticed in cybersecurity these days is, fortunately, right now, more companies start to focus on cybersecurity practices when it comes to smaller size of companies. Do you notice this trend as well?
To make sure that I understand the question, you're asking, it seems like cybersecurity, the practice of cybersecurity is no longer just the domain of large enterprises who have resources to dedicate towards security. It's permeated down into smaller organizations as well. That's absolutely the case. That is very true. Yes. And I think that the challenge is, how do you secure an organization when you are maybe a single-digit number of people, a few dozen people? Yeah. But you are, especially in the context of a startup who's writing software, you're taking on a lot of risk. You're writing software, you have infrastructure that is exposed to the internet, you're holding perhaps a lot of sensitive customer data, you are consuming a lot of third-party services and SaaS services, so you have a lot of third-party risk. Yeah. These are things that no longer are just the concern of large enterprises with their own data centers. That risk is definitely present in smaller organizations as well. And so how do you get access to security expertise? How do you manage your practices and your processes to manage that if you don't have that expertise in-house, if you don't have that sort of mythical security unicorn who's able to manage all those things?
Yeah. Is this something that you help to address? Like, no matter what's your size, you help figure out what are the best measures to take place? Or if you could, let's say, give an advice to a CISO, right? How would you adopt your practices as your company grows, right?
Yeah. So for small businesses, one of the things that we see is small businesses that are writing software, a startup that is trying to create product and get customers, getting customers and getting revenue and getting that initial traction is the most important thing. Yeah. And that has to come first over anything else.
Yeah.
A security person or a security advisor who comes in to prescribe a lot of restrictive controls is not doing a favor to the business. Yeah. You may be doing the right thing for security, but you're not serving the business. And so one of the things that we practice in our organization is what we call scale appropriate security.
Okay.
So making sure that you're bringing the right amounts of security in the ways that matter most, that have the largest impact to the risk posture of that organization at the right time. And so as an example, you might have in your early days, you're moving very fast, you're creating a lot of product, you're adding a lot of new features. You might not need too much obvious security, or put another way, the kinds of security controls that you want to implement really need to not slow down the business and the ability of creating product or attracting those initial customers.
Yeah.
Another way to look at it is a lot of your initial customers, if you're pre-launch, for instance, maybe you have some design partners. Yeah. Maybe your VC firm is your customer. Yeah. If you're spending a lot of time and energy getting a SOC 2 or trying to meet a lot of compliance needs, those are not your customer's that's a mismatch between your customer expectation. Okay. Your customers aren't necessarily asking you to have those security certifications or have passed those audits. So a lot of times we will see companies start to make those investments appropriately. We'll start to make those investments in SOC 2 or different security audits once they start to mature and once that customer pressure starts to manifest. Customers start asking them. That you start to get larger customers, more sophisticated customers, more skeptical customers who want some evidence that you are following good practices, have the right kinds of policies and mindsets in place. And that's where a SOC 2 report or achieving ISO 27001 or similar certifications may be more relevant. Certainly if you're operating in an environment where you're handling healthcare data, HIPAA will be important. Or if you're operating with European privacy data, GDPR is relevant. But in general, we try to help our customers not do too much security too early in a way that's slowing down the business and preventing them from achieving their more important business goals.
Well, that's I think it's very useful approach to anyone doing security, right? Because with I think sometimes when there are so many vendors out there, you're just thinking, I need this tool, I need that tool. And as a security practitioner, a security person within a company, of course, you want to have best tools in place, right? But then at the end of the day, it's all about cost. It's all about where do I put my resources. So I love the way you put it. Like it's driven by customers.
It is driven by customer. That's right. And it's funny, at the time that you and I are speaking, we're only a week away from the RSA conference in San Francisco, which is a huge extravaganza of security companies selling products that purport to make you safe. Yeah. And that's great. And there are a lot of products that manage risk effectively for organizations. But it is very important, especially for startups, to not lose sight of the essentials, really for any organization. But no security product on its own is going to compensate for bad process, inattention to the basics, people moving carelessly or not having a standard set of processes in the way they operate the business. So one of the things that I believe is companies should first focus on the essentials, do the basics well, make sure that you're consistently doing the basics, and that you're always checking for gaps. You're always checking to see where you might have some things slipping through.
Yeah.
So a great example might be, do you know who all the people are in your organization? Do you know if they're full-time people or contractors? Do you know all the devices that they're using?
Yeah.
When they lose a device, or no longer use it, are you keeping track of that?
Yeah.
Right, just basic inventory questions. Is everybody using MFA? Even the super admins, especially the super admins.
Yeah.
Do you know the software that people are using? Are they all using different web browsers?
Yeah.
Do you know what kinds of extensions they have loaded in their browsers that they're using? There's all these, there is not necessarily one product that's going to come in and solve those problems. And so you have to be very judicious about, in a small organization that's moving very fast, that has limited funds, where you deploy product in a way that has the most bang for the buck.
Yeah, that makes sense. And, a lot of organizations, for some reason, assume that if, let's say, you're part of security team, then in some way, no threat can really touch you, which is often not the case. And we saw so many examples similar to cyber heaven attack, where actually a security person was targeted, right? So no one is really immune to this kind of attacks. And you mentioned about the necessary security, like the basics in check. And what we see today is that a lot of these attacks originate in the browser, right? So is this something that you see even small enterprises to be more concerned about?
Absolutely. It's a great observation, and it's definitely something that we see in Latacora. One of our practices is a managed detection and response practice. And we respond to organizations that have suspected that they have a breach or for certain have been breached and need someone to assist them. It is the case that info stealers are increasingly prevalent. The rise of stolen credentials and marketplaces online where you can buy session tokens is incredibly widespread and I think is underreported on. It is a larger problem than I think is broadly understood. For a long time, the browser was just another piece of software on your desktop, and people were maybe worried about clicking a link in an email, but security teams were really worried about what happened next, typing their credentials into a web page to steal a password. But it is the case now that malware is sufficiently advanced and the value of those tokens that live in people's browsers is so valuable that a lot of attention is being paid by attackers on taking those tokens and then reselling them, where I think it is time to take a much closer look at the practices of how people use browsers, the integrations that they permit in those browsers, and how we're securing them. I think that's a very good observation.
Yeah, definitely. And, as you saw that a lot of adoption is customer driven, I just thought about as security follows the size of a company, right? Depending on what you need, and it's often driven by your customers, right? Do you see someone that works in B2C sector? Is it faster? Is it slower in adoption of the security practices?
You're exactly right. In a B2B startup, they are going to have business customers who have a much more rigorous set of security expectations for their vendors. And so a lot of the one pattern that we often see in our customers is our B2C startups have more lax security controls because they aren't getting that customer pressure to up-level their practices.
Yeah.
They tend to be slower to get a SOC 2 because their customers aren't asking for a SOC 2.
Yeah.
They're slower to get assistance with their sales enablement, to have a more consistent set of answers that they give to security questionnaires. They're slower to put EDR software on their laptops for their developers. In contrast, in a B2B startup, because you are getting enterprise customers who have a much more rigorous TPRM process, third-party risk management process, you start getting those complicated security questionnaires much sooner. You get asked about your SOC 2 much sooner. And so that is definitely the case. We've had customers where they're a single digit number of employees and they are getting 700 security questionnaires from their customers because their customers are huge enterprises.
Yeah.
And it's like less than a dozen people and they just don't know what to do with this questionnaire. And they're like, we're just a small, wee little startup. What do you do about this?
Yeah.
It's like, well, you're selling to enterprise, so your expectations need to be, you need to recalibrate your expectations.
Yeah, you really need like a full-time person to just go through all these questionnaires that are being thrown at the smaller companies. Sometimes
it feels like you need a full-time person to do that. Yeah. Luckily, there are a lot of solutions out there that help people with their vendor security questionnaires these days. Some new third-party products. We offer a service that does it.
Yeah.
There are a lot of different ways to get help with that challenge. I have a lot of sympathy for those large enterprises that are trying to get a handle around their third-party risk because it's very difficult. In prior jobs, I've worked in organizations that have had literally hundreds of SaaS products that we've used. And so that's a lot of risk. That's a lot of attack surface. That's a lot of places where your sensitive data is going. So I have a lot of sympathy for those enterprises who are trying to get their hands around that. I am not convinced that a multi-100 question Excel spreadsheet is the most effective way to get to the bottom of that risk. And I also have a lot of sympathy for the startups and the entrepreneurs who are trying to bring new products to market and new solutions to market who are struggling with this volume of questions. It's a real challenge.
And just to add another layer of complexity, when it comes to global security teams, right? How do you go about managing this? You've previously and still right now work for a global brand, right? So how do you go about, building the right processes in place when it comes to global teams? It must be quite challenging.
I was very lucky to work in a global organization where I was either smart enough or fortunate enough to hire people much smarter than me. Yeah. So there's that saying, if you're the smartest person in the room, you're in the wrong room. Yeah. So I definitely brought that ethos into my hiring practices and was lucky to hire people who felt a lot more like peers than like direct reports. So they were able to act as local, very, very effective local experts in terms of what was the security culture happening inside the company in those places. What are the mindsets that employees brought every day when they signed into their laptops? What were the assumptions that they showed up with? What were they more likely to do or less likely to do when working with sensitive data and systems? And then when operating with startups that are in different geographic contexts around the world, your customer expectations are going to be very different. So companies that are used to selling in Europe they know that their customers that they're selling to have a set of expectations around privacy that are quite different than the US. They can be quite different. When conducting business in China or in India, you're conducting business over WhatsApp and WeChat respectively. And so that messaging risk, like where your sensitive data lives, can be completely different compared to the US. So figuring out where your risk lies depending on the applications you're using, where your users are, where your customers are, you definitely cannot make any assumptions. While located in the United States, you can't make any assumptions about where your risk lies unless you either spend a lot of time in the geographies in which you or your customers are operating, or you have hired talented people in those geographies to help inform your decision making and your risk analysis, for sure.
Yeah, I love the fact that you touched upon, various messaging platforms, because they also become quite a frequent entry point for attackers these days. And the fact that they're encrypted, it makes it very difficult for existing technologies to cover. Do you see some of these challenges arising as you speak to companies today? So many LinkedIn messages, people trying to, move you to some malicious QR code or things like
That's
that.
That's right. It's very much the case that if you think about the venture capital example, one of the challenges of venture capital investment professionals is they need to be where the founders are and where the entrepreneurs are. And so if you are investing in cryptocurrency or blockchain technology or Web3, whatever it's referred to these days, those entrepreneurs are operating in Signal, in Telegram, they're operating in chat. They are not sending emails. We already talked about, depending on the geography you're operating in, you may have very broad use of a certain messaging platform or not.
Yeah.
So understanding the patterns of communication, where data is moving inside your organization, depending on your audience, is indeed super important. The thing that adds an extra layer of complexity is if you have a regulatory obligation to preserve messages. You'll see this in a regulated financial space where the SEC or another regulatory body, maybe you're an insurance company and you have a financial regulator who has a requirement that you archive messages for a certain period of time to make sure that policies are being handed out to your customers in a high integrity way. There can be this real tension between what the business demands, which is conducting real-time chat with the people who are really important to the business, and the needs of the regulators, and those things can really be in tension for sure. And then you just add on top of it, that's just a sort of message preservation, e-discovery challenge. There's also the challenge of, with all these communications going over these chat applications, you don't necessarily have a security gateway that's scanning those messages to make sure that malicious attachments or links are not going in being communicated. So what happens when you click that link? How smart is that browser? How well protected is that browser such that when you click that link, you're not taken to a bad destination? You really have to think, it goes back to defense in depth, making sure that all those links in the chain, you have some controls in place to make sure that the worst thing doesn't happen.
Yeah, it's, as you said, security should never go against what the company's needs are. And I can imagine it's quite challenging, especially when it comes to GRC, privacy, right? How do you make sure that the data stays secure, but at the same time, no security breaches happen? So it's a bit of a tricky situation. And I imagine that a lot of aspiring professionals also will be listening about, your story, your journey, and all this piece of advice that you're sharing. What do you think someone that wants to become a CISO one day, what's one skill they should cultivate that most people don't know?
I think a good skill, this may be something that people already know, but I would say learn how to make allies and be a business resource to the fellow executives inside the organization.
Okay. What do you mean by that?
So one mindset that you can have as a security practitioner as you start to move up the ranks, and maybe you're a security engineer and then you start to have a little bit more responsibility inside a security organization, and then one day you get a CISO job, It can feel as though your job is to push security into the organization and push security up into the business. And I would argue that it's the reverse.
Okay.
The organization is best served, and you are best served as a professional by deeply understanding the business, the customers, the product, and taking that understanding the risk of the business and trying to manage that risk using technology and processes and tools and policy.
Okay.
So instead of feeling as though security is a thing you're trying to push into the organization, a successful CISO will be a person who is a resource for all the other executives to help the business move faster, be more successful, make more money in a way that is safe. Having an attitude of, no, we can't do that, or no, that's too risky, I think works to the detriment of a security leader. That will be a security leader who's not able to say, yes, we can totally do that. And I've got some great ideas about how to do that in a safe way. You'll just be much more successful, I think, as a security leader if you can be a business person who's thinking about risk rather than a security person who has reluctantly put on the mantle of, oh, I guess I'll have to talk business and talk to the board.
Yeah.
Like embrace the business, understand the business, and work to be an advocate for the business in a way that reduces risk for the organization.
In a way, being not someone who is in a separate team, but part of the same team that tries to achieve the same goal.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
That's exactly right. Yeah. There's also a key to, we were talking before about being skeptical and being sort of paranoid. There's a way to be skeptical and data-driven in a way that encourages other people to be data-driven around you. And I think that really good security leaders can be data-driven and help people in marketing think about risk in a quantifiable way. Help people in sales think about risk with real numbers behind it.
That's a good example, because as someone I just spoke to recently, I was asking, hey, how do you translate the security risks into business, right? A business concept. And they said, well, if you talk about revenue, that's easy to understand.
That's right. Yeah. Yeah. And it can be very difficult to tie a given security initiative to, if we don't do this, we will lose this amount of money. That can be very challenging.
Yeah.
And it doesn't always have to just be about a dollar bottom line.
Yeah.
It can be about, how do we just move at a faster velocity? How can we have more confidence in the way we are going to market and the way we are creating product? How can we gain a little bit more confidence and feel comfortable moving at a faster pace because we've got some guardrails around what could possibly go wrong? As a business leader, as a security leader, if you can create some good guardrails for your company, then people feel empowered to take more risks because you've sort of limited what could possibly go wrong. Yeah,
feeling empowered is super important. And you've been advising companies for quite some time now. What security innovations are you the most excited about right now?
I am excited about security that helps people move more quickly and interact with their sensitive data in ways that really reduces friction. I mentioned before this idea of being worried about during phishing tests if people are clicking on links and entering credentials in websites.
Yeah.
Imagine if you could tell an organization, click whatever link you want. It doesn't matter. Like, I'm excited about technologies that allow people to move really quickly and use their technology to its utmost and not have to think about always being worried about doing the wrong thing. So I'm excited about that. I'm excited about new ways of having UEBA, user behavioral analysis. I think for a long time there's been a a lot of different companies have tried to solve the problem of understanding user behavior and profiling user behavior.
Yeah.
And it's been very challenging. I think that those technologies historically have had a lot of false positives, have been a little bit brute force, have been difficult to really operationalize. And I think we're starting to see either through the use of AI or just trying again new approaches. I think we're going to be seeing pretty soon different ways of profiling user activity inside organizations in a way where you can really identify outlier behavior and risky behavior in a way that previously has been too difficult to really operationalize. So I'm very excited about that.
Yeah, those are two. I think the first trend that you mentioned about just making things easier for users, right? That you don't have to constantly think, hey, do I click on this? Do I not click on this? And really trusting the tools to do all the work for them. That is super helpful. And understanding user behavior, this is something that I think really is going to help a lot of security teams to, also do less guesswork. Who is the one that keeps screwing up within our company, right?
That's right. There's a potential for there to be more ways for people to use their technology on their devices that lets them be more flexible and move more quickly. And so I'm excited to see that kind of technology become more prevalent.
Yeah. If you were starting your career today, what would you focus on learning, and would you take the same path as you did?
Oh my gosh. I mean, I've made plenty of mistakes, so I would probably not take exactly the same path. But I do think that I was very fortunate to get a lot of the fundamentals, which is to say I was able to work hands-on with a lot of technologies. There is a lot of value in starting with good foundations and having a good foundational experience in systems, how computers actually work, how networks work, cloud platforms, getting into AWS or GCP and deploying cloud resources and understanding firewalls and networking. For a security professional, keeping things secure requires a deep understanding of all the different ways something can go wrong.
Okay.
And for me, in my experience, having a lot of that foundational knowledge, hands-on experience with that foundational knowledge has been invaluable. I was able to get that either by working hands-on inside organizations, doing systems administration or networking or firewall administration or doing cloud deployments of infrastructure. But I also have had home labs, and I've experimented outside of business hours using technology and deploying my own systems for my own curiosity. So my general advice would be focus on the foundations, get hands-on experience, pursue the things that seem most exciting to you, that you just can't help. You just have this innate curiosity about. Those are the things that you'll just spend hours working at home on some problem or some solution, and you'll look at the clock and realize it's 2 a.m. And that kind of learning when you're early in your career is just totally invaluable. I think I would actually also say, and it's weird to say, but I think that like using AI sparingly is probably not a bad idea. Like I would be a little skeptical of, at the time of this recording, there's a bit of an emphasis on vibe coding. There's this concept of vibe coding. And is it possible to write software, as an example, is it possible to write software just by narrating what you want the shape of that software to look like? And I think that's fine. I think that's great. I think it is a perfectly acceptable way to get a minimum viable product out the door and to manifest an idea that you've got. There's nothing inherently wrong with that.
Yeah.
But if it isn't paired with a deep understanding of the fundamentals, then that knowledge is really thin. And the more in my experience, the more deep and comprehensive an understanding you have of the entire technology stack, of all the way that DNS works, all the different places your data actually goes when you send an email, the more comprehensive your knowledge, the more flexible you'll be in your career, and the more effective you'll be.
That's very helpful advice, because so many people are worried today about how AI is going to negatively impact our critical thinking, right? And we just gonna work on that top layer without going to the deep bottom of the iceberg and really understanding the technology, whether you're a vendor or you're a security professional that helps to secure your company. These are some of the fundamentals.
I think that's right. I think that some things in security, some things in a professional environment, some things about being a human and composing emails or making an argument or writing code, the fact that some of those things are hard is the point. Like it is meant to be hard, and the struggle that you have with it is not effort that is in vain. It is effort that has a lasting impact on you. It strengthens you. It improves your capabilities, your critical thinking. And I think in the long run, I anticipate people who use AI or other tools to shortcut that learning process to alleviate that struggle are doing themselves a disservice in the long run.
Do you think you have to have certain qualities to succeed in this field of security? Let's say, does it help to be paranoid to be successful in the field, or what would you say is most helpful?
It does. It helps to be skeptical and to approach problems with an engineering mindset, with a data-driven mindset. One of the things that I've struggled with as I've advanced in my career is revisiting my priors and making sure that I'm not recommending the same old technologies, the same old approach, the same mindset from when I initially started my career. Things change and technology changes, and things that seemed unlikely or impossible 20 years ago are very possible and very likely today, and vice versa. And so if you are always recommending the same architectures, the same approaches year after year, and not revisiting, why do I think it's the case that it's always best to implement a control this way? Why must, as a silly example, why do passwords need to be 8 characters long, or 12 characters long, or 14 characters long? Why do we have passwords at all? What would it be like if we didn't have passwords, period? I think that a good way to future-proof yourself as a security professional is to adopt that engineering-driven, questioning, skeptical, approach things with a skeptical, engineering, data-driven mindset. It'll make your decisions better. It'll make your arguments stronger. You'll be able to defend yourself and your recommendations to skeptical business leaders in your organization. It'll just serve you much better in the long run. If you're too dogmatic, I don't think you're doing yourself, I don't think you're being very effective as a security person.
And I'm sure it's the case for many industries, but especially in cybersecurity industry, where new attacks appear every single day, right? If you're not thinking faster than someone next to you, then you might be left behind. So
I think that's right. I will also say, though, I've been disheartened that a lot of the basic practices that always serve organizations will have prevented a lot of the security breaches that you see. And so it can be very tempting, especially in Silicon Valley, especially on the eve of RSA with a whole bunch of new products and new features that are coming out, to solve security with a checkbook or with a product. And again, there are a lot of really cool, really innovative companies doing really innovative things in the security space. But if you are not following the fundamentals, and if you're not making sure that you're following the fundamental practices and always getting better at them and checking to make sure that they're consistently applied. No new amazing AI-powered technology is going to protect you. It is important to be skeptical and revisit your priors, but there are some fundamental truths about security that you should always keep in mind.
Yeah, it's a balance.
It is. That's right. It is a balance.
Yeah. We have this little tradition, look, where typically our previous guest asks question for our next guest. So our previous guest asked you, do you think in next 10 to 20 years, there'll be need to have a separate internet? Something that people pay for that is highly secure, where people transact in a trusted way.
That is so interesting. I do not think there will be a need for a separate internet. I'm aware that there are private government networks, military networks that are purpose-built for specific, incredibly sensitive applications. And those definitely have a role. Like that is very important. There are certain situations where it is very important to have a separate mode of communication. Apart from that, I don't know that a completely separate internet would actually make us significantly more secure or would even be that effective ultimately for a couple of reasons. One would be, I think that backwards compatibility is super important, and interoperability with the existing internet. I feel like that would be a sufficient drag or a sufficient counterbalance that would keep any sort of separate network from really truly being effective. That would be one prediction. The other thing is, to go back to biology, actually, the internet in a way has evolved to have a whole bunch of, I say evolved, to have a bunch of defenses. And it is surprisingly resilient. Over time, people have invested decades of engineering effort and careful design and work to make it as resilient as it is right now. I am skeptical that a separate, newly created internet would be as resilient as the one we have right now. That would be my initial take. So I'm skeptical about that argument. I do not think so.
Yeah, it's it makes me think almost going back to biology of immune system, right?
Yes, exactly. That's exactly right. Yeah. There have been all manner of attacks. Now, that is not to say that the internet as we know it today is perfect or is as resilient as it could be, because it is certainly not. But people have invested a lot of time and effort in improving it to the state that it is right now, where it is possible for us to use web browsers and do banking over the internet and operate safely with cell phones and transact data. Given all the, it is, again, not perfect, but it works surprisingly well. And so I think the internet, the way that I think about it, the internet that we've got today is pretty resilient. I'd also make the observation that as soon as you create a new, separate, private, secret internet that is where all of the really secret stuff is and all the really valuable stuff is, you've just created the target that all the attackers are going to be aiming for. So it's not like attackers aren't going to know that is the place to invest and spend all of their effort. That is the dynamic that I would definitely be. That adds to the risk profile of this new mythical Internet 2.0.
What question would you like to ask to our next guest?
I would like to ask, to go back to the question about the passwords, actually. I would want to ask, what would have to be the case for us to no longer use passwords? Or maybe another way to put it is, when will we create our last password? When will I create my last password? When will it no longer be necessary to have passwords?
That is very...
something like that.
Yeah, maybe sooner than we think.
That would be nice, wouldn't it? I don't know. I think about all the places, like what would have to be the case to never have to type a password in? What is the technology that would have to exist? What would have to be true for there to be no more passwords?
That's a great question. Well, thank you so much, Luke, for coming to our Be Fearless podcast. It was such a fun conversation to learn about your journey, about the evolving threatscape and the world without passwords.
Absolutely. Thank you so much for having me. I really appreciate it.
Thanks.